There we go. I think everyone out there can hear me. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think that I'm surprised, there's a lot of people that have asked me about this class, but I know there was some confusion about its time. So, well, welcome. We're going to talk about fun stuff today. Compliance. I know everybody loves compliance. I'll pick that up in a minute. People can come in. They can grab there. All right. So, what is your hope? What do you hope to get out of this class today? What are y'all looking to learn? What do y'all want to know?
Are we going to talk about dot loop at all?
We're not talking about dot loop at all.
Okay.
Nope. Just erase that from your vocabulary.
Okay.
I want to make sure I'm doing things right.
Okay. So, where to go? Am I doing things right? What else? Changes. Changes in compliance and the overall structure. Anything else?
Finding all the templates.
That's cute. We're not going to touch on all of that today because, again, that's a work in progress. We'll talk about what that might look like moving forward. For right now, sorry, I have this mic and now it's going to choke me. For right now, we'll talk about what some of that looks like. And if you have questions afterwards on where to find some of the stuff on dotloop, we'll see if I can make that happen. If you want to ask me questions about dotloop afterwards, for now, for transactions, for now, but I think this is going to open your eyes to some of the stuff that's going on. What else? Liz, what would you like to know about? Just anything and everything? All right. Anything that you would like to learn or know? Just the whole process?
I mean, I have this Cesar,
Sure.
show me.
Uh-huh.
I work in 2 or 3 deals. Yeah, I want to hear you.
Okay, perfect. Well, so as you all know, this is about compliance. We are not talking about DocuSign or dotloop today, and the reason being is because, yes, we're still currently using dotloop, and we are moving towards DocuSign, but that is changing at a crazy pace. I mean, every time we learn what's coming out, it's all new, and so what I don't want to do is get into the weeds of how and where. We're going to talk about the foundational stuff you need to know so you can have those things available, and the process will come after. And the process is probably going to be a little bit of the easier part because it'll all be in one space. You don't have to log into multiple accounts. Your green sheets and your dotloop and your transactions and yada, 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 MyKW, it's all going to be in one space. And so I can promise you that although the transition to the new system might be a touch bit cumbersome as you're learning, is it me? Okay. So it might be a little bit cumbersome because you're just trying to change your mindset and what your typical strategy for completion is. But I will say that once you do make the transition, this should be a much easier, user-friendly process. Okay, so the one most important thing that I'm going to tell you today that you're going to want to write down and you're going to want to commit to memory, it's something different than what we have always done, is that all of your documentation will be required to be submitted within 3 days of signing documents. Not after option period, not 5 days into the contract, within 3 days. So if you do a listing agreement, 3 days in, you have to submit it. If you have a contract, 3 days after it's executed, you have to submit it. If you do an amendment, 3 days after it's executed, it has to be submitted. If you get a survey, 3 days after you receive it, it has to be submitted. 3 days, that's the bottom line. There's no additional thing. 72 hours, yes.
So every time you add a new document, if you've submitted the original file
Yes,
to transaction, and let's say a week into it, you get the T47.
correct.
The file has already been submitted. do I resubmit it again with the T-47?
So you will just resubmit the T-47. So the way that it's done. So again, I don't fully know the full process of how much you're going to actually have to resubmit, if it's the full file or if it's just the document. But you will press resubmit every time you add a new document that's completed.
Okay.
So not like, hey, I'm playing with this amendment, we're not sure yet. Once it's executed or completed, it will be submitted. So if you get the full contract, or let's say the listing agreement, and you get the T-47 a week later, even though you haven't gone live, you would have submitted the listing agreement 3 days after it's executed, and then you'll go back and resubmit the T-47 once you've received it, the seller's disclosure once you've received it, the survey if you received it opposite of the T-47. So your submission button will be hyperactive, especially, Trish, in your situation where you're doing multiple files. Liz, when you're doing multiple files, you'll be submitting a lot. Now let me tell you, I'm super excited about this, and this is why. Right now, the way that it works is that a lot of people wait till their file is completely done and they submit it. Beautiful, except when they submit it late, it messes it up for everybody else. So DAs come out late. We don't get to be proactive on your transaction. We can't tell you ahead of time if we see a wall that you're about to run into. And so this way, as you're submitting them, Mary can review them. So it will no longer be, there's a big chance, I should say, I can't say for certain, but for right now, it looks like it will not be based on closing date. It will be based on submission. So I suggest that everybody gets their files in on time. You do your paperwork, and you submit it within the 3 days, and you'll be just fine. So there's a lot less flexibility in that. You will not get an approval. You will not be able to move forward or submit any other documents until those things are submitted, which leads me to the next part. And we're about to go over a lot of the documents that are in this, but I will tell you the way that it's set up in the opportunity section when you're working with compliance, there will be required documents. So if you go in and you say that you're doing a listing, it will auto-populate all the documents that are required for you to sign under a listing agreement. If you say you're doing a buyer's representation, it's going to auto-populate all the documents that are required for you to sign if you're doing a buyer's representation agreement. The flip side to that is it also means that the documents that are not required but might be required depending on the situation, those will be subjective, so you will have to go in and then select them to add them. For instance, on a buyer's representation agreement, there's not much that's not required, but once you go under contract, and let's say you select, okay, we're making an offer, it'll auto-populate the 1 to 4 or whatever you select, but then it'll be up to you to go pick the lead-based paint addendum or the HOA, you know, the property subject to a mandatory membership in a property owners association document, right? And so you will then have to select rather than it automatically select. Any questions around that? Because I know it's a huge change, but it's going to be so good.
But DocuSign is pretty much like Doodle, right?
Like what? Like Dotloop? It's very similar. In fact, I feel like DocuSign's a touch bit more user-friendly. In my opinion, I've used it. It's a little bit more DocuSign. Yeah, I think Dotloop has been a wonderful tool, but I am happy to be in DocuSign. Yes.
I've never used Dotloop, well, except a few times. So DocuSign, is that ready to go, or are we using it yet?
We are not using it yet. That's a great question. It leads me to tell you that don't go open your own DocuSign account. We will let you know, come on in. There's paper here for you to grab, Minnie. We will let you know when the time is right. So when KW releases it, you'll have to sign on to DocuSign through KW. If you have your own account and you've been working files through that, they're not able to be merged. So at some point we will have to transition your files over to KW's version of DocuSign. So just to reiterate for those who just popped in, you've got 3 days to turn in your loops, or to turn in the documentation. I'm not going to say loops anymore. I apologize. That's going to be a habit I have to break. You have 3 days to turn in your documents. So 72 hours. You can no longer wait till the end of option to turn in stuff. You have to turn it in right ahead of time. And why? Because it's going to benefit you as an agent. We can be proactive by reviewing your documentation as soon as it's submitted. How many people have turned in documents currently and not gotten them reviewed until a week before closing? Yeah. And that is not really anybody's fault. It's just the way that the process works right now with dotloop. And the challenge has been trying to get agents on board with understanding when to submit their files. Now you have to be on board and you have to submit them in that way. So it will allow Mary and the staff to be more proactive in making sure that not only are we seeing your documents way ahead of time, but there's a lot less entrance in terms of making sure that people aren't submitting late. Any questions, concerns, comments, input, anything? You all excited about this? Is a good thing? Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay. So to move forward, we're really just going to be talking about the checklists here that's in front of you. And it's very, very foundational class. I know it seems kind of like, well, I know all this. That's okay. But what's important for me is that you guys understand what's going to be required, what are additional documents, and of course those might change depending on the situation. Again, I don't even have access until August 1st to kind of show you what it's going to look like. We will be having a lot of courses so that you guys can learn how to put your contacts into command. And there's videos that have come out now that we'll be sending out to y'all on how to use opportunities. You will have to know how to use opportunities, because once everything is moving forward, green sheets will be gone. And so to get paid, you will have to use command, period. No ands, ifs, or buts. You'll have to learn it. So if you are concerned, if you want your team to come in and learn more about the process, let us know. Scott and I will set up an appointment. We can do some after-hours training, weekend training, to do whatever you guys need to do to be kind of on top of the process. Okay? Yes?
Hey, Kristen, what does it look like once in between the transition time? So,
Great question.
You're in the middle of the deal with dotloop, and then we're flipping over to dotloop.
So you can still use dotloop until about September 1st.
Oh.
After September 1st, you will have very minimal access to dotloop. In fact, after September 15th, you don't want to use dotloop at all. We can only compliance will be able to get into dotloop for like a historical document if they need it. But a lot of those have already been pulled or are being pulled out of dotloop right now and put into command and into our own archives, so that way we have access to them.
Is it going to be like will things transition from?
Yes.
Into?
Yes, they will. Now, what I'll tell you is if on August 15th you're starting a transaction, you should be doing it in command and not in dotloop. Because if it's not going to close until September 20th, you really want to just be forward thinking enough to not do it in dotloop. Because if for some reason something gets lost in translation, which would be my concern because it's technology and it's a fast pace right now, I wouldn't want to leave that to chance. So in my opinion, it's better to work that in command. You will start to have access to that in the beginning of August as well. So the more of you that are starting to use it in command and under opportunities, the fewer opportunities there's going to be to have stuff lost in translation. Yeah. So for really, you've got about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, okay, and then start thinking, okay, we're transitioning to command, and then you'll have DocuSign, and then getting comfortable with that system. There's nothing wrong with printing your documents out of dotloop and uploading them and keeping them in a file, but for the next couple of weeks, just use dotloop. It's okay. It's not a bad word. It's just I want to prepare you because it's going to happen quick. Once it does happen, it's like it's not going to be like, oh, you get a month after we transition. No, you get September 15th. You will not have access to dotloop. So command is the way to go. And again, we'll have more than enough courses. We're working with Mary to be here to do some training as well on what that's going to look like. Staff is being trained on what it's all looking like. So you're in good hands. Just be prepared in August. That's going to be the conversation from there on forward, what the transition is going to look like. But again, I think once you're in there and understand the process and the system is working, I think you guys will be satisfied with the results. I really do. dotloop has been a source of stress for a little while. It's always something that's not working. So any other questions?
August 1st is Thursday of next week, so you're saying it's going to be live then?
It should be live Thursday or Friday next week. That's when we should have access to the list. Mary's already loaded them in, so they have them, but they haven't fully released everything yet. And so we will let you know as soon as you have access, but we're estimating right around the 1st or 2nd so that's next week. Yes. So getting in there and fumbling around and playing with stuff is a great idea. Opportunities, now remember they're working on it right now. And just so you guys kind of get a bigger picture, everything you guys do is connected to the transactional piece that runs the Market Center, which is what Ryan runs, the Market Center administrator, right? It's the financial back end of everything so you guys can get paid. And so that system is the biggest system getting the overhaul right now. That's where their focus has been. And they made that transition last month for the MCAs. And now we've been given this kind of 45 to 50-day transition period for Command, from dotloop to Command or DocuSign. So, so that's what's going on. So when you jump into opportunities right now, like if you were going to go play with opportunities to figure it out and see what it does, what you see today may not be what you see tomorrow. So just be patient with it. It's just the process, because now all of the big systems that we need to run the bigger portion of Command are starting to come together. This was the biggest piece. And so if you just understand that if you see a change or if it's not working for you right then and there and it's frustrating, just turn it off and try again tomorrow, because I can assure you that the tech team is working very hard to get everything running smoothly, and so you guys have consistency when it's important too. Okay? All right. Any other questions? These are great questions. Anything else?
It looks like the referrals are already working to Command, right?
Yes, referrals have been working for a while. And so what should happen is as you start to connect those referrals, and that should talk to, at some point, we'll talk to the compliance section of that. So that way, because you kind of fill out, if you've done referrals before, if you haven't, you go and you fill out what referral percentage you'll pay out and what's your client's name and all of that stuff, and instead of doing a referral form. So as of right now, you still have to do a referral form, but over time, yes, referrals will talk to that, and that will submit directly into the compliance portion, so that way that's accessible for you there. One less piece of paper you have to worry about. Again, that's why the benefit of having it all in one place is going to be huge for not just Keller Williams, but for the industry as a standard. So, all right, so document checklist for contracts. That should be your first page. So you can mark out green sheet. That's going to go away. That's at the very top. It used to be you had to fill out your green sheet as you were filling in all of your information. Now that's going to be a part of the process, okay?
So even today, right now, no green.
Green sheet today, yes. It could be gone as early as the 1st.
Okay.
So we will let you know. Yes?
Does auto-populate to Ryan, or how does that work?
I will let you know. It's a great question. Yes.
Because with our team, it might be.
So as of right now, continue doing
Yeah.
green sheet, but as soon as we have access to the system, we'll be able to show you what it, yeah. So, but there will be a time when green sheets don't exist at all, and it will be sooner than you think. And so, again, as soon as we get a hold of that information, we'll let you know. But as for this process after the change, so these, what I'm talking about today, most of these contracts, the checklist, are going to be on point for both situations, but for the green sheet, yes, until you're fully on DocuSign and fully integrated into opportunities, do your green sheet. But there, we will let you know when you will no longer have access to it. But for the future process, you will not do that. Does that help a little bit? So under required documents, the MLS printout will be a required document. So if you go under contract on a property, you're required to print out the sheet for the MLS. Does anyone know why we do that?
Back everything up, right?
Yes. What else? Commission. That's your contract for commission. It has it right at the bottom of the MLS sheet. So when you download it, keep it. So it also is a great thing to copy right when you go to pull up and you're like, oh, my client wants to go look at this house. Take a copy of that and save it in a file on your computer, because if it says that they're leaving the refrigerator, later on they go and uncheck the box refrigerator and you have the copy that says refrigerator, then you have some negotiation to do.
Yours has to show pending, right?
It doesn't necessarily have to show pending.
It can show active.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, pending probably is a little more realistic, but what you're trying to do is making sure you have documentation of what they were going to pay for commission and what the features were. The problem with showing pending is they could have made changes since you first originally saw the listing agreement. So either way, I mean, I think either way is fine. Most of the time they don't change things, but there is that rare occasion that they'll go in and be like, oh, I didn't mean to press the refrigerator button. Well, when I showed it to my clients, they had said that it comes with a refrigerator, so how are we going to handle that? Tax records will be required. You can find those either on Realist or the county website. So a fully initialed and signed contract. I think it's going to be fairly challenging now moving into our new era, if you will, to forget to sign a contract. And you think that that's who would forget to sign a contract? Probably about 50% of our agents at any given time forget to sign the contract, because here's what they do. They'll get it all ready, and they don't want to sign it before their client signs it, so they share it to their client, and their client signs it in their head. They've checked it off. It's done. It's signed. And they completely forget to get their portion initialed and signed. So it's not an effective contract unless all signatures are on the document, so making sure that's fully initialed and signed all pages. Any questions on that? It also notes the execution date is filled in. Just to make a note, these checklists will be on the new system. I'm thinking that Mary and I had talked, and I think she was able to expand the little sections over here so you can make more notes. So if for some reason there wasn't a survey or the client's looking for the survey and they did a T47, then you can make a note on this section over here on this right-hand section. Is that the right hand? Yeah. Of the checklist, okay? So wire fraud notification, that will be required. Information about brokerage services, that will also be required. General information, notice to a buyer, that will also be required if, of course, you have the buyer side. Inspector information, looks like that will be required. Third-party financing condition addendum. So the third-party financing addendum may or may not be required. I think that will be a conditional requirement, because if you have a cash deal, then it's not going to auto-populate. So I think that's one she said that will be conditional. Seller's disclosure notice, and then the survey T47. So, and this will be something that obviously if they're ordering a survey, then you would just make a note, no T47, seller or buyer is ordering the survey based on the contract. Any questions on those? Yes?
You have a survey, but you don't have a T47 because they have made changes, but you want to go ahead and upload the survey.
So a T47 is required no matter what if there's a survey being transferred from the seller to the buyer. So if it's not a brand new survey and the seller has one but they've made changes on the T47, it says they have not made changes except. If they haven't made changes, they would mark none and provide it with a survey. If they had made changes, they would provide the changes that were made on the T47 and provide that with a survey. And then at that point, it will be determined by the lender and the title company whether those can be drawn on or whether a new survey would need to be done. And if a new survey needs to be done, then the T47 can go away, old survey can go away, a new survey will be uploaded. Does that make sense?
Do you suggest on the T47,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
updated measurements.
Sure.
And then in the detail of the T47, you would just say, like, shop built,
Correct.
so in, by the measurements. shop
Correct.
built,
Correct.
and attached there, okay.
Yeah. I mean, even if their fence was moved, does anyone live near Forest Creek? So I'm in Forest Creek, and they're changing. Are you in Forest Creek or near? You're in
No.
Hutto, right? But you're
Yeah,
by
I
it.
I lived in Forest Creek before though.
So there used to be off of, is it Payne Stewart? Anyways, the main drag right there after the school, right between the tennis courts and the school. Forget the name of the street. Anyways, the HOA is changing the fence line. And so they're putting in brick and mortar kind of fences, if you will. And they're almost like noise barrier, blocks or whatever. So it's basically brick and mortar. And so they've taken away the wooden fence line. Now, if anybody knows anything about real estate and people who put fences in, it's not an exact science. I mean, it should be, but it's not always. And so there's a chance that they could have moved back or forward the fence line that was there originally. So there's a chance that if anybody goes to sell those properties, they're going to have to make note, hey, the fence was removed and the brick wall went in. And so that could have changed the boundary of what our survey says. And then if it's required to be drawn on, then that would be determined by the title company and the lender to see if that would be allowed. So I wouldn't have them draw on their only survey copy. I would just have them make a secondary copy. So if they've done a pool or a deck, or they've done a house, an addition to the property, I think it's safe to put it on a copy and then provide that with the T47 along with the original copy of the survey, and then they can determine if a new one needs to be done. Now in Avis's, if you've heard Avis talk, she's said quite a bit that it actually is a benefit to have a brand new survey every single time you do a sell. So it's a benefit. And the other benefit to the buyer is the person who pays for the survey typically gets the warranty, if you will, by the surveyor. So if the surveyor did something wrong and the seller purchased it, the seller has those rights. If the buyer purchases it, then the buyer has those rights. So you can potentially negotiate it that the buyer pays for it at closing. And the seller gives a credit for it so that the buyer is really the buyer of the survey, so they have the rights from the surveyor. That's muddy, but I'm just giving you an example of what that would look like. But a T47 always has to follow a survey if it's an original survey or a survey that's being passed along, if it's not brand new. Great question. Any other questions? So additional documents, the intermediary relationship notice. And just to be clear, that is if you are doing a deal with an agent in the Georgetown office or the Round Rock office. Not Cedar Park, Northwest, Southwest, Waco, what have you. Only the Round Rock office and the Georgetown office because they have the same broker, which is Avis. Referral form with the current W-9. If you're doing a referral on this transaction, then you will need the W-9 to the person you're referring to. So, and it's the W-9 from their brokerage unless they're their own broker, and that would be their own W-9. But that is required if you're paying a referral, so Ryan knows who to pay. Addendum for propane gas service area. Those are rare, but especially as you move out into the newer areas, some of those are on propane service areas. Does anyone not know what a propane service area is? Okay, so a propane service area means typically a group of homes, normally it's like 8, 10, 12 or more, are managed on a propane tank that the whole community uses. So they don't get to choose who brings in the propane, they don't get to choose how much they pay. It's kind of like your water bill. The same water company services a certain area, they don't get to choose it. So if that's the case, then you would do this addendum for propane gas service area. If they have a propane tank in their front yard, whether it's buried or not, or in their backyard, whether it's buried or not, you don't have to do that. That's their own propane tank. They get to choose who services it and how much they pay. Okay? Lead-based paint addendum, it says built before 1978. Avis also asks if it was built in 1978 that you also provide the lead-based paint. Because if it was built in 1978, it's a very good chance that it could still have used paint that was prior to 1978. A lot of times construction, if they started in October of 1977, you know, they may not have been finished until 1978. So she likes to make sure that we also include that form for those that are in 1978 as well, not just before. So that's one thing. The second thing is this has to be provided to you from the seller at the time of your listing agreement. The date needs to correspond, meaning they need to fill that out while they're filling out the listing agreement documents. This cannot come after. This cannot come while you're under contract. So if they were to come and check on us, it would be immediate that they would have seen those, and we would be liable if we could be liable for anything, but it would offer more, could be in more trouble if the dates don't match up. So it doesn't mean have them fake the date either, just have them sign at the same time. It's pretty simple questions, and you know, even if it's an estate sale, they have to have this document. Okay, so 1978 on or before, and then making sure that it's always provided at the time the listing agreement is done. And then this will need to be provided to the buyers. If you're the listing agent, it needs to be provided to the buyers. If you're a buyer's agent and you're out in the field and you're about to put an offer on a property that was built 1978 or before, you need to ask and request this document before you submit an offer, because it needs to also be signed the same time the offer documents are signed and executed. Make sense? Any questions on that?
Is it best practice just to upload it in MLS?
It is. It is. However, if you're on the buyer's side, you don't get much control, and so sometimes you have to chase the document down. But I would advise my buyers not to sign anything until we see the lead-based paint addendum. And then it needs to be filled out by the buyer, signed by them, and submitted with the offer.
So this is always provided by the seller?
The seller, correct. Always. Even if they mark unknown, they have no clue. Like let's say it's a trust and the kids have no clue.
With the seller's disclosure?
It should be, yes. Yes. Yep. Awesome questions. Okay, great. Austin Energy audit. It says see Austin Energy or ABOR websites for details. If you have a property that requires an energy audit by Austin Energy, you have to have an energy audit. So how do I find out if I need that, Kristen? Funny you should ask. You look at the property, make sure that it uses Austin Energy, because typically it's if they use Austin Energy. You can also call Austin Energy and give them the address and say, my clients are about to sell this property. They may potentially need an energy audit. Can you run the address and tell me if they need it? Yes, no. What is your name? Write down the time, the name you talked to the person you talked to, who they work for, and so notate that and put that into your account, or put that on the little notes section in here to say this property is new, so it's not required, or it's in the ETJ, so it's not required, or whatever the situation might be. Okay, that has to be done. It should be done before you even put it on the market. So if you forget, which is easy to do because it's not something that, especially when you're selling more north, it's not something you're used to doing. So if you get that one Austin property and you completely forget, it really needs to be done and given to the buyer before they put an offer on the property. So that's kind of your deadline. It should be done before you even put it on the market, and upload it on MLS. But if for some reason you forget, then just make sure it's given to the buyer before they put an offer on the property.
So this is a form or just a phone call?
This is an audit. So what happens is the seller has to pay a company. It's an energy audit company, and there's a ton of them out there, really great ones, that will come out, and it could cost a couple $100 up. And what they'll do is they'll shove stuff under the doors and they'll blow the AC as much as they can and pump air through the house to make sure that the house is efficient, that there's no crack seals on the windows, making sure that it cools down appropriately, making sure you're not losing air outside under the doors and stuff like that. So,
Is there like a sort of a geographical area that
it's Austin. Austin proper is typically the one, but there have been instances where Austin Energy Services in the ETJ area, so I would just call them. Because typically, you have to be able to vote for city council. ETJ is extra jurisdictional area, I think. Yeah, that's right. Extra jurisdictional area, yes.
We have to take initial in this document.
Say again.
If, for example, I have a customer,
Mhm.
I represent him as a buyer representation, right? And in the documents in MLS coming this, I have to take my customer signature or
Yeah,
initials,
you'd want them to initial it saying they received it.
first page
Yes.
or all pages?
All pages.
Okay.
Anything that comes from the MLS, you want your client just to initial saying they've
Okay,
reviewed.
okay.
Extra territory jurisdiction. Thank you. Yes, ETJ. It's been a long day. I did strategic planning for 3 hours this morning, so my brain's like, whoa, what'd you say? So yes, extra, say it again, territorial jurisdiction. Yes. There's ETJ, and then there's another one too. There's MUD, and then which is the Municipal Utility District, and there's a PID, Public Improvement District. But ETJ, you'll find those often. They're typically the gray space in between places where it's like it's in the city, but you can't even vote for city council, so it's not really. So you're getting some city services, but you're not a part of the city.
Okay.
So deed
But
restrictions
that
are different.
doesn't necessarily mean rural
Correct. It's not necessarily rural.
area.
Yeah.
Right.
So, for instance, Wells Branch is typically, parts of Wells Branch is the ETJ of Austin.
Okay.
They have Pflugerville School District, but they're Austin address. So that's really where you'll see them. I'm sure that Star Ranch or where I'm at in Forest Creek 3 is probably some kind of ETJ. I'd have to look at the boundary map. And you can look at it, but it's easier just to call Austin Energy and say, hey, we're in this weird section where we have an Austin address. It's a different school district. I'm not really sure, but I just want to confirm. Can you tell me if I need to do an energy audit? And they'll say yes or no. And they'll ask you a series of questions. How old is the house? You know, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll tell you yes or no based on that.
And is there areas around Lake Lion Mall in that area that aren't Austin? They're not.
There's some Cedar Park, some Austin.
There's some Austin. Like
So
within that
I
boundary.
couldn't tell you. You'd have to look at the boundary lines.
Yeah.
And again, if you see, you ask your client, who's your utility company? You're in Austin. Oh, it's Austin Energy. Great. You know, they give them a call. Ding, ding. Hey, by the way, in the city of Austin, they require an energy audit. That's going to cost you anywhere from $200 to $500, maybe even a little more, depending on the size of the home. So I just want to pre-warn you that that has to be done. It is a city standard. We have to do that. And so we have to also provide that to the buyer. So that will need to be done. So you call them and get that done while you're getting the house ready, or while, again, if you do it while it's on the market, that's fine, but it just really needs to be provided to the buyer before they go under contract. Okay? And what was I going to say? If you're bringing a buyer to an Austin property, make sure you ask the seller, do you guys have an energy audit? Okay, because they may not know what you're talking about.
What if it's an investment property that they're going to demolish either way?
Call Austin Energy. If Austin Energy manages it, then you need to call them and get the approval. I can't tell you. Because they're ultimately the ones that are going to fine your seller or the buyer if they find out that the sale was done without the energy audit. And it's a pretty hefty fine, so it's just better to get it done. It's cheaper to get it done than to wait for the fine, I promise you that. But I did sell one that was being demolished. We didn't have to do it. I don't remember why. And it was over in the Montopolis area. So it was definitely older. But I don't know, but I will tell you, check with them. It's a quick call. They'll tell you yes or no, and then you go from there. Any other questions on energy?
How frequent the government every 2 years, every year?
So the city gets notified every time you sell a property. They can go in and check to see if there was required an energy audit and you didn't do it, then they fine your seller or the buyer.
Oh, so that happened?
Every time you make a sell in Austin, you have to do it.
Okay, right.
Yeah, it's not like a tax audit. It's more of an it sounds like that, but it's more of an activity where they have to go out and blow air through the property to make sure that there's no, and it just really gives a rating, like an energy rating to the property. So, okay.
It's not gonna keep the seller from selling it, though, right?
It shouldn't. I mean,
They're
it
not
might
gonna
keep a
require-
buyer from buying it, but if they're tearing the property down anyways, who cares?
But they're not gonna require the seller to put it, fixed up to certain standards before they sell it.
No,
Okay,
it's just disclosure.
okay.
Addendum for sale of other property by buyer. That is a contingency that you guys might know that as. It's a contingency form. So that would be required if the buyer cannot purchase the house that they're putting an offer on unless they sell a property, or unless it could even be that there's like money involved, like they're waiting for an inheritance or something like that. So you would fill that out. Or this particular would be sale of other property by buyer. Seller's temporary residential lease. Again, that is not a lease back. We don't use that word. It's seller's temporary residential lease. And that is only required if the box is checked on closing and funding. On the closing section, instead of closing and funding, it would say seller's temporary residential lease. So, any question on that one? Short sale addendum. If you don't know about short sales, take a short sale class. Taking a short sale or REO class is going to benefit you no matter what, because at some point, if the market turns, we have foreclosures that are out there right now in this market as hot as it is. So knowing how to service those clients will benefit you. Addendum for property subject to mandatory membership in an owner's association. So that's just your HOA. If it's in an HOA, you need to fill that form out. Information about on-site sewer facility. That's only required if the other party has a TAR or TR seller's disclosure on it. So we no longer use on our listings TR seller's disclosures. We only use the TREC seller's disclosures. And the on-site sewer facility form is no longer required, is not required for TREC seller's disclosure. It is required for the TR disclosure. Now, if you are the buyer of a property and have been given a TR seller's disclosure on a property that has a septic, then you do have to have the on-site sewer facility addendum. Any questions? So, if you're the listing agent here in Georgetown, you are required to use the TREC seller's disclosure, period. No TR. If you are buyer, it's okay if they give you a TR one, because their broker may be okay with that. Our broker is not, but if you're the buyer, we can't control that. That's what they filled out. If they have a septic, then the on-site sewer is required. It is not required on the TREC. Why? Because there's a checkbox on the TR form that says if there's a septic, you have to provide this document, which is the on-site sewer. It is not on the TREC form. Jennifer.
So, I use the TREC seller's disclosure, but because I'm so used to using the on-site, I went ahead and had the seller do one.
Just toss it out.
So I don't even supply it. I think I uploaded it to MLS.
Just take it off MLS. It's not, it doesn't matter. You don't have to use it. It's only required if you're using a TR seller's disclosure, not TREC. Yep. It's not a bad thing. It's just you don't.
What if an agent asks for one because they're so used to seeing it?
I could so understand that you're wanting to use that, but those aren't required using the TREC disclosure.
Okay.
Yep. They can go get the septic outline from the county. If it wasn't built before a certain time. If it was, sorry, they may not have it. And then, of course, if the seller wants to provide that, they can negotiate, providing the information, on where it is or whatever. I mean, it's not a problem. It's just not required. Yep. Okay, so mud notice or a water district, that WCID, that's the Water Conservation Improvement District. Sometimes you see them as the Upper Brushy Creek Water District. Sometimes you see them as, I can't even think of different names, but there's a million way they're named. Ultimately, if you're in a water district, I don't care if it's however, whatever letters come before it. If you're in a water district, you still need to provide the notice. As the listing agent, you need to provide the notice when? Before you go under contract. So that needs to be signed before you go under contract, because it gives the buyer an out if it's not provided before they agree to everything. On the opposite end, if you are on the buyer's side, you need to ask the seller, because you've done your due diligence, you've gone online, you've looked at the tax records, and the tax records show that it's in a water district. You're going to call the seller's agent and say, hey, I didn't notice on the MLS that you put the WCID notice or the Upper Brushy Creek Water District notice, or the PID notice or whatever. I noticed that it wasn't on there. Do you have that? No? Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull it for you. I'm going to send it to you. Your sellers are going to sign it. You're going to send it back so my buyers can sign it, because I can't give you the offer without it. Now, you can, as a buyer's agent, let it go. But your buyer's going to say, well, didn't you know that we were in a water district notice? That's going to cost me extra tax dollars. So it's up to you. You're not required to remind the seller, but it's definitely best practice as a buyer's agent to be on top of the things that even the seller may not be on top of, okay? So, and they're really easy to find. You just go to the website, and it's called Notice to Purchaser on the websites. So you just download Notice to Purchaser, have your client sign it, and you should be good to go.
If for some reason we forget, like something like that, will they catch it sometimes?
Well, so that's the hope with the new system, that because you're submitting these things early, all of these things, if you're the listing agent, all of these things should be submitted. And so on the tax records that you submit, it's going to say water district notice. It's going to red flag her if you don't have one on there, and you'll get notification that it's not compliant. Yep. Yes. It's going to save some wonderful time at the end with everyone scrambling to get notices and get things signed and not get DAs. Non-realty items addendum to contract. Again, if you're going to use one, it does need to be in there, but you don't have to use one. It's dependent on what you're using it for. Bill of sale, if you guys were here on Tuesday, bill of sale is perfectly appropriate. I've used them many times before. Plus, you know, people get silly about couches and beds and curtains and stuff like that if they're negotiating over them. So just get it done ahead of time. And obviously curtains stay with the property, but if it's something they're negotiating, make sure you just have it done ahead of time. Okay?
If they offer money like $10 for a refrigerator, is that paid cash or is it should be in the closing figures?
It depends. So it depends on how they want it done. So if they want it on a non-realty item, that goes to the lender. So if the lender's going to have an issue with it, it's okay to do it as a bill of sale because they're just buying a refrigerator. But if the lender prefers for it to be on a non-realty item, or they prefer to be have it a party to the contract, so connected to the contract, then that's fine too.
So who does the $10 go to?
So the $10, if it's a party to the contract, so if that non-realty item addendum is done, then that will come out at closing. So it should, yes. Huh? You haven't seen it yet? Uh-oh. So yeah, and you might want to notify them that, hey, there was a non-realty item addendum, and either my sellers were supposed to get $10 for that, or the buyer was supposed to, my buyer was supposed to pay $10 for that. On the opposite side of it, it's okay to do a bill of sale, but if it's already attached to the contract, then you would want to see it on the closing disclosure of the statement saying that that's coming out as a credit to the seller. Yep. Good question. Any other questions on that? Registration between broker and owner. Does anyone know why you'd use this? Why would you use this, Liz?
For a FISBO?
For a FISBO, yeah. Why else would you use this?
For a what?
For sell by owner. Sorry, yes. For sell by owner is a great example. If you are working with for sell by owner, you will need to do a broker to owner registration, and that needs really to be done before you even take your clients into the house. And it doesn't matter if they're not even paying you commission. The reason why is because there's a couple sections in that state what the for sale by owner is listing the house for. Because what if the for sale by owner over the phone says, I'm listing it for $415,000, and you show up and your clients love it, and he says, okay, I'm listing it for $450,000. You misheard me. Excuse me? That's a whole lot of difference, right? So you go and say, okay, I need this document signed. It says that you're willing to pay me this much commission and you're selling the house for this much and these are the people I'm bringing through. So you've now registered all of that. It's an legally binding document. So that way when you walk your clients through, you can have assurance that those are the correct figures moving forward. Of course, everything's negotiable, but you want to get that to start before you ever walk your clients through there.
Can you get that done through email or?
Yeah, you can do it through, you'll be able to do it through DocuSign. Yeah,
Right now, how do people do it now?
same dot loop. I would keep, so I love for sell by owners, I kept files in I kept seller's disclosures in my car, T47s, information basically about what is required, and then I'd go knock on a for sale by owner's door and say, hey, you know, blah, blah, blah. Hey, do you have a seller's disclosure? Oh, I don't have one. Great, I have one for you. Here's the seller's disclosure. This is required by the state of Texas that you give this to anybody that purchases the home. Can you fill this out? And then I would have a registration between broker and owner. So keeping a little file box in the car is a great idea just in case. You never know. You might be in the grocery store line. Someone's like, hey, I want to sell my house. Hey, can I go over now and check it out? Great. Listing agreement. Done. Telling you, efficiency. All right. Registration between brokers. Why would you use that? Builder. That's a great one. Mm-hmm.
If somebody's not a member of your MLS to like agree on commissions.
Yes. So if you are a member of Actress and you go to Temple Belton and you show a house that's on a combo lockbox, because it shouldn't be, but that's another class, and you go show a property and it's only listed on CTX MLS, you have to have a registration between brokers to get paid commission, because the MLS rules state that they don't necessarily have to pay you a commission because you're not a member of the MLS. So that's a great one. Another one is if you're going to negotiate commission. So even if, let's say, you're both a member of Actress and they have a certain commission amount that you're not really happy with and you want to negotiate it, you can use a broker to broker to negotiate the commission. Or let's say you're helping your mama buy a house and you tell the listing agent, look, I will reduce my commission if they'll take it off the price of the house. You do a broker to broker agreement. Reduce your commission and then they'll take it off the price of the house. So. If it's not listed on the MLS, there's quite a few. I think Rex does that a lot. Or if it's a pocket listing, you have to do a registration between brokers.
What does mean pocket?
Meaning it's not listed on the MLS, but it's still active for sale. Because now you don't have any proof saying what they're going to pay for commission. So you need that in writing before you make an offer. Personal property hold harmless agreement. If you're selling your own property, you will have to sign something like that. Move-up amendment. Again, if you're doing move-ups, we're not going to get knee deep in that, but if you have questions about that, let me know. We'll talk about it. Supplemental documents and amendments. So this is where the submit is going to happen, right? Because if you go through and you agree and execute an amendment, you submit it within 3 days of execution. And then let's say you guys decide to change the price for whatever reason on another amendment and it's executed, you would submit that within 3 days. And let's say right before closing, the closing date has to change. You get that executed, you have to resubmit that as well. Okay? So you're going to be resubmitting, but that's okay because now she's going to have availability. She'll be able to see everything you're submitting as it comes in so we can review it.
This is just building your file also.
Correct.
So there's not any big deal to have to just do one click more and submit. You want to bring it into your file.
You would think. Correct.
Okay. I'm just making sure I've got the
That has not been a standard practice, though. It's been practice that people will execute all the amendments and turn them all in at the same time, which then gets you turning your file in 2 days before it's due, and then 24 minutes later you're contacting Mary or Ryan going, where's my DA? And we're saying, well, is your loop complete? It hasn't been submitted, or it hasn't been reviewed, or you turned your document. It's kind of messy. So now...
Do you ever get the opposite, like she gets like, why are you submitting this? You don't need to be submitting this?
No, because she can't see it until so right now what happens with Dot Loop is, let's say I'm in line for October, or for, what's the date? August 26th, right, which is, it's July. Slow down, Kristen. So for July 26th, which is tomorrow. So let's say I'm in line, or let's say, okay, let's take that back. Let's say I'm in line for July 30th. I'm waiting, so patient. I've turned everything in. She can't see me because she has 40 other people standing in front of me. And guess what? Someone else just cut in line, and then someone else just cut in line, and then now I'm 20 people behind where I was.
Because they've waited.
And their closing date is sooner than mine, so they get preferential treatment. So oftentimes she's so busy reviewing backlogged stuff because people are turning stuff in late that she can't get to the ones that are turning it on time. Now it's going to be opposite. She's going to see it as you turn it in so she can review the document.
Everybody needs to play nice and track.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you. I had someone almost kill me this morning. Goodness gracious. He cut me off. I was like, Easterner. I'm not even from the East Coast, but man, I was this morning on my horn. I was like, hey. And he was just like, ah. I'm like, you almost took off my front end. Okay, side note. Any other questions on amendments and how you're going to be submitting them? Okay, so buyers walkthrough and acceptance form. Really, y'all, you should be doing this. If you have buyers, they need to sign this. They really do. And yes, it's at the end of your transaction. I don't care. Just get it done. Just get it done, because here's the thing. And don't go do a walkthrough for your buyer without your buyer. If they can't be there, you put it in writing that they can't be there, and they understand that they're accepting a property without doing a walkthrough, and they're going to sign this acceptance form and put on the bottom of it that they weren't able to do the walkthrough for whatever reason. Why? Because you do the walkthrough and there's a stain on the floor that they don't like, and they go on the day after they close, they moved in, and they see the stain, who they're going to blame? Yes, sirree, Bob. You. You don't want that. So just get it signed. Say, you know what, I understand that you're still in another state or you're traveling here now. Do you have a friend or a family member that could do the walkthrough with me? They can be on FaceTime with you. I don't care. But have somebody else there. Don't do it by yourself, and get the form signed saying that they agree or accept the property as it is at the walkthrough. It's best practice to do the walkthrough 2 to 3 days before closing, not the day of. That is craziness. I can't tell you how many deals fall out because they do a walkthrough the day of, and half the stuff, all the curtains are gone, and the TV mounts are gone, and the refrigerator that was supposed to stay is the one now that was in the fridge. It's all funky. I'm telling you, just do it 3 days before, making sure everything's ready to go. As a seller, you want to advise a listing agent, you want to advise your sellers, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I just want to advise you, the buyer has a right to do a walkthrough. So I prefer that you're ready for the walkthrough 3 days before closing. I also prefer, just a side note, that you keep your utilities on for 3 days after closing. Trust me. Just trust me. 3 days after closing for a listing.
Submit this after you need to close already, for the day of closing?
It can be the day of closing. Yeah, it needs to be done, but it shouldn't be done after. It should be done before you close. Even if you have to take a picture of it on CamScanner and upload it into Dotloop on your, or not, well, it won't be Dotloop anymore, it'll be Opportunities.
But then from Dotloop, you will have to resubmit.
Yes. Yes, but it needs to be in your file. So in the new file, though, you won't have any problems with it because it'll be immediate. Termination documents, notice of termination of contract and release of earnest money. Please send those together. If you're going to terminate a contract, those should go together. Don't do a termination of the contract and then send an earnest money 2 days later. Don't do it. Send them both together. Don't ask me why. Trust me on it. They go together. If you're a buyer, you're going to terminate a contract, do the release of earnest money at the same time. Any questions on that? Okay. Next page. Document for listings. That probably took the longest because that had the most amount of documents. Some of this stuff you guys already know. We've already talked about. So you will be required to submit the MLS sheet. That one will for sure be active, or incomplete or almost active is fine. And you can update it if you need, or if something changes. Hello, if something changes on the MLS sheet, like you change the price, it's a good idea to download it and resubmit it. Just saying. Okay? Because that's our documentation to show us the account of what has changed. Exclusive right to sell, yeah, is your listing agreement, so that will be required. Seller's disclosure, you might want to write TREC next to that just in case. Tax records, realist or county. I personally do both. I also provide both of those to my clients because sometimes they're different. Realist gives you a little bit more information, but sometimes that's pulled in from the MLS, and sometimes the MLS is wrong. So don't just look at realist, make sure you're checking both. Survey with residential real property affidavit, that's your T47. Again, there's a little box over there. If they don't have a survey or if it needs to be adjusted, then you can mark that in there. CMA, that needs to be in there. And the wire fraud notification. Conditional documents, same thing. Addendum for propane gas system service area, we talked about that. Update to seller's disclosure. Does anybody know when you'd update a seller's disclosure?
Anytime there's a change.
Anytime. Pipe breaks and you get it fixed, you update the seller's disclosure. You're under contract, they get an inspection, they send you said inspection, you may not be happy, you attach the inspection or you update the seller's disclosure. Now, I would prefer just to attach the inspection because even if I update the seller's disclosure, I may forget something, right? And I say me as the seller, not the agent. You guys don't do that, the seller does. But it's best just to include the inspection report instead of trying to update the entire seller's disclosure. There's just more room for error that way. Now, if they've fixed it all, then they can either write that on the inspection report or do an update to the seller's disclosure saying, we've done this, this, and this, and these have all been fixed or whatever. Energy audit. The limited exposure form. So this is required if the property is not going on the market either ever or with more than 5 days after you sign the listing agreement. Excuse me. So if, let's say I take a listing today, it's the 25th of July, not August, and I take a listing agreement and we sign it all today, but they're not going on the market for 2 weeks because we've got make-ready photos, staging, we've got to get the lawn done, got to get a power wash, you know, all that fun stuff, right? Then I need to do the limited exposure form, okay? So there's a part on the contract, which 1 to 4 contracts is the first. Diane Waters is going to teach that class. But in one of the paragraphs, it's going to say, when will you list this property? And there's a little box that says you're going to keep it off the market for so many days, and it's going to ask for the reason. The limited exposure form is similar, but what the limited exposure form does, it educates your client on what their risks are for not putting it directly on the MLS. For instance, if you're coming soon status, that's what most people consider this, and they're showing the property, and let's say Liz gets to see the property, and she puts in an offer, and I call to see the property at the same time, but for some reason they're out to dinner or they've got family over and they won't show me the property, then I can complain for a million zillion reasons, and they could potentially be liable for not showing me the property as well. Because what's good for her should be good for me. So I should have been able to see the property so we can put an offer. So what does that mean for your seller? They open themselves up to fair housing violation or multiple avenues of litigation. So I just say, if you're going to show the property, you have to show it to everyone who asks. Everyone who asks. If they want to see it, you have to make a concerted effort to let them see it or give them an opportunity to see it before you accept an offer. Okay? All right. Any questions? It also lets them know that they could get more money for it when it goes on the market. That's the other thing it does. Sorry. It just says, hey, by the way, selling it off the market could cost you. Yes?
What happens if, let's say, I am the listing and coming another agent, usually we have to require the pre-approval letter. No?
You don't have to.
No.
Mm-mm. It's up to your sellers. It's up to your sellers if they want to review. And you'll find that more the higher dollar the home is. So when you have your $1 million properties, they want to see sometimes even proof of funds before they let anybody in. But that's dependent on what the sellers, and you want that in writing from the seller because, I mean, again, it still opens them up to liability. Right. Because people can have more than enough money, they just don't want to show you a pre-approval letter for whatever reason. And you say, well, sorry, you can't see it. Well, it's because of whatever. And then they're open. I mean, you're open to litigation. I can't talk today. You're open to litigation no matter what. However, you give yourself a little bit higher risk by denying anybody to see the property.
Okay,
That makes sense.
okay.
Good question. Request for information from an owners association. That's obviously that form that asks what the HOA dues are and who they are and all of that stuff. So lead-based paint addendum, we've talked about that. The MUD or the WCID. I have seen people in a MUD and in 2 water districts before, so if they're in different water districts and a MUD, you have to provide all of that documentation. Information about on-site sewer facility, you might want to put if on TAR form, but again, this is for your listing, so you don't need it. Seller's authorization to release and advertise certain information. Does anybody know why we use that document? What does it do? Y'all put your buyer's ears on. If I say as a seller, all offers accepted, or all offers considered, I should say, or investor special, what do you guys hear in those statements? Motivation. What could that cause? If I'm telling you investor special,
Low ball offers.
yeah, bring all offers, right? Those could hurt the seller's bottom line. So to say those things verbally or on MLS or anywhere, you have to have the seller agree that you can use those terms, and it has to be written on the seller's authorization to release and advertise certain information. Motivated seller, that has to be on this form and agreed to. Because as a buyer's agent, I'm like looking for motivated sellers. Really? Because will you take 20,000 under? I'll negotiate you all day long. You tell me motivated seller or investors, great for investors, great rental house, you know, those types of things. So anywhere where it could hurt the seller to advertise it as such, then you want to put it on there. Any questions on that one? I hear agents all the time stand up in this room say they're a motivated seller. I want to say, do you have that in writing? I might start. It'd be good. They'd be like, what are you talking about? Seller's authorization to release and advertise certain information. Information about special flood hazards. If they're in a flood zone, you can look that up. A lot of time realists will have it, but you really can go to FEMA and look it up what their maps say. Those change often, so I should say often. They do change, let's say that. So check it. Again, personal property hold harmless. Amendment to listing, and again, termination of listing agreement will need to be on there. And then if you'll notice, there's a little note that just says on the MLS it needs to either show temporary off the market before it gets withdrawn. And you could ask me or Scott or Donna and we could withdraw for you. Any questions on listings? All right. Document checklist for leases. It's very similar. So the MLS printout, information about brokerage services, exclusive right to lease. This is for listings. That's the very top one if you're going to do a lease listing. Amendment to listing, an addendum to the TAR or ABOR lease listing if there is one required, and then wire fraud notification. One thing I want to note is that on the required documents for lease, it's actually not on here, but she mentioned it to me today. The MLS printout is required. Fully signed lease agreement is required. Now, if you cannot get one, and this is very popular, that if they apply online to a property management company and they do the lease with the property management company or an apartment complex and they won't give it to you, just make a note in this little section that they won't give it to me. Now, you can always ask your tenant, your client, hey, once you sign the lease, can you send me over a copy? And then you can put it in your loop. It's really good for you to keep because you can note the date of when their lease is up so you know to call them 3 months ahead of time. I'm just telling you, it's a great business practice to prepare them to buy. However, you still need that for compliance if you can get it. If you can't get it, please make a note so Mary understands what the situation is.
What if the house isn't on MLS?
Then you would need to do, who's leasing it?
Like who wants to be the tenant?
So if it's like, does it have a for rent sign?
Yes.
So whoever's behind the for rent sign, landlord, property management company, you as an agent would need to do registration between broker and owner.
Okay.
and then you would need to get the lease copy after your tenant signs it. And then make a note where it says MLS printout. Just say, hey, here's the residential or registration, between broker owner, was off market, was not on MLS.
Okay.
Co-broker commission and invoice. So if you are the lease listing agent and someone brings a tenant, another agent brings a tenant, you are required to get their W-9 so we know who to pay. Same thing as if you're doing a referral. We need to know who to pay, so they're required to give that to you. It needs to be current, so 2018, 2019. We've recently had people send us like 2014, 2009 W-9s. I'm sure the IRS loves that. It has to be current. Ours says 2018, so when you send that out, and I think they come out every October-ish, so you'll see a new one coming out here in the fall for us. If you are the tenant's agent, then you will need to provide our W-9, KW's W-9, to that other person, including an invoice, and it says it right there, co-broker commissions, invoice, and W-9. So they'll provide you an invoice and a W-9, or you'll provide them an invoice and a W-9, and it tells them where to send the check to. It comes to Keller Williams, and then Ryan splits it, and you get your check. Any questions on that?
Last year I had a tenant.
Yes.
And I did this, I got the W-9 and all. But this year when the lease was up, the owner is a realtor. She did not require them to renew a contract.
That's okay.
That's fine?
Yeah, you probably didn't get paid on the renewal, though, right?
That's correct.
That's fine.
That's the reason she did that.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not without, the tenant won't have a problem because they don't have a signed contract?
I mean, they probably have one in their current signed contract because I'm sure their lease allows them to go month to month. So that current lease that they have signed typically has a stipulation somewhere stating that they can go month to month for however long. And so that covers them.
Okay.
Now, if they didn't have a lease and they're just living there without a previous lease, then that would be an issue.
It doesn't cover them for a price increase,
Or for
like
a
if
certain
they're
amount?
month to month.
It depends on the lease. It depends on, I can't tell you, I'd have to see the lease, but I would suggest to them that they review their lease and read it. Don't just skim over it. I know there's a lot of legal jargon, and if they have questions, they can ask you, but you're also not a property manager, so you can't give them any kind of tenant advice. You can just say, well, it looks like that paragraph says that. You may want to just talk to your landlord. It feels a little funny not being able to explain everything to them, but if they're in a property management agreement, it has to be between tenant and landlord and not agent, because you guys can't property manage. So, but there should be a stipulation in there that allows them to go month by month. Most do. Like when I lived in an apartment, it allowed me to go month by month, and it told me, okay, if you're going to go month by month, it's going to add another $15 to your monthly rent, and you have to still give a 30-day notice. Like, it was very clear what that looked like. So I was kind of still under some kind of written agreement. It just wasn't a lease. Like, it didn't have a term. Okay. So one thing Mary was saying is that we don't necessarily have to provide a wire fraud notification if we are the lessees and there's a tenant involved. So just, we'll send out some writing about that. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. And then, of course, the residential buyer-tenant representation is required if you are taking a tenant to a property to get them to sign a lease. You also need to have them sign a buyer-tenant rep. Conditional documents, intermediary relationship notice, addendum regarding lead-based paint, agreement between brokers for residential lease, there it is, leases only if not listed in the MLS. So there's that. And then pool spa maintenance addendum. So if there's a pool on the property and they have to maintain it, there's an addendum online that you can pull. And then again, extension of residential lease. So if they want you to help them with the extension, you can do that. But if they're not going to do an extension, then you don't have to worry about it. Last but not least, new home builder contract checklist. So required documents, new home builder contract. And it says including broker agreement and financing addendum. So you don't necessarily have to do broker to broker with a new build if they have it within their documents, but you do if they're like a custom build. Because sometimes they don't have that broker agreement in there. So just make sure that you're going to be signing something. If you're signing something saying that they're going to pay you something, then that would cover you. If you can't get the contract, much like a lease, best place to call is the title company. Even if it's not executed, you can ask them, hey, do you have a current copy of the contract? Because sometimes they docu-sign it to your client signs it. You could ask your client for it. If they don't have it, then you need a copy of it somehow. Some site sales agents will not give you a copy, so just get it from the title company if you can't get it. I know that sounds crazy, but I've had it happen a couple of times just personally. That people, I'm like, hello, I'm the agent, you're gonna have to give me a copy. But IABS is required, buyer-tenant rep is required, wire fraud notification is required, and a TILA RESPA authorization if they are financing. So if they're using a lender, you have to have a TILA RESPA authorization on this transaction. And that's just the form that says that they give you permission to access information from the builder, from the title company, from the lender. So that will need to be signed, and that is in the loop for new home builds. Supplemental documents, inspection information. You'll also want to talk to them about phase inspections, by the way. General information and notice to a buyer is required, or it says supplemental. You really should get that signed. I'm sure that will be required. Builder improvements or modification amendment. So if something changes along the way, if your client decides to move a wall or add an upgrade and they do an amendment on their end, you need a copy of that to put in your documents. Referral W-9 if applicable. Authorization for commission concession. Personal property hold harmless, and move up amendment. Again, we've talked about those. May or may not be required depending on the situation. So what questions do y'all have? That was a lot of information, but I hope that you guys have a little bit of an excitement for the changes that are coming, that they're not so daunting. It's going to be good. What else? What questions you got? Concerns, comments, input. What would you like to see on this process? Anything that we can change, or now's the time. If we need to change, modify, whether you're team structure, individual agent, what do you got? Nothing? Sounds good?
I'm just excited to see the green sheet portion included in with the DocuSign, so we're not having to go here.
5 different systems, yeah.
And download stuff. So
And
that's exciting.
that is great. Thank you. When I heard that, I was like, yes. Yeah, and it should automatically update. So whenever you update numbers on the system, it should update. So, but the best part, I think for me even more so, is just being able to see those and be proactive on the transaction, so we know ahead of time. Because it's the worst thing for me as as your coach or just as your ATL to get a call saying, oh my gosh, I've gotten all the way through this transaction, didn't know I did this wrong. And you have to sign that personal property hold harmless. It's not fun for us. I know it's not fun for y'all. So we're working really hard. So if you have comments or input, I am happy to hear them. You could call me, email me, text me. You can send me an anonymous email from a weird Gmail account. I will listen to what you have to say, take it to heart, and see if we can implement things that just make your lives easier. So, all right, we're done. Y'all have a good day. It's Thursday. Woo! Which means tomorrow's Friday.
Yeah.
Kristen, you got something?